Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians on the land on which we meet today, the people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. This session is finding clients who value design. Now, this one's a bit different to what we've done in the past because I'm calling it a live case study. By the end of it, we will have introduced you to a person that we believe values design. And we'll show you how we analysed that, how we found that person, then we analysed why we think they value design. Now, this person doesn't know we've done this, so please don't badger him. He looks like he'd be a good client, but he also looks like he's got designers that are working with him. But the process is really what we want you to see today. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to cover a definition of design value and how you actually define it. And that's a definition from the client's viewpoint. That's to be stressed. Now, this is stuff we've covered in previous sessions, but we're just going to recap it quickly here. But then we want to get into the guts of it, which is identifying design value clients. Exactly how do you go about it? And we're going to show you exactly how to do it. Having identified them, how do you start the discussion with them? Well, first of all, you need to write a design value proposition which shows your understanding of what value design could be for them. We're going to finish off with an action plan that shows you how to put all of this stuff into place. It gives you step-by-step to implement everything we've talked about today. So let's get into it. Defining design value. We've covered this off in previous two sessions where we've really talked about this. But the key to it is that we need to understand design value from our client's perspective. So our research in this space through some research that was done in the UK, which we've replicated here, what we do know from that is clients will take notice of you if you understand their industry. If you've done some industry-wide research that shows you understand what goes on in their industry. If you've then also done some primary research, which means you've looked at their business specifically and you understand their business. So they're the two things that you need to show first off to a client. They want to see case studies. They want to see where you've done something like this before with a peer organisation or something that's closely aligned to what they do, where they can see a direct relationship from the case study to them. They want to see that you're an influencer, that you actually understand their industry and can talk about it intelligently, that you're an expert in that space of their industry and how design works in their industry. They're looking for lots of data, lots of facts and figures, and they want a cost-benefit analysis. So what we know is they're the four key things a client is looking for when they're engaging with a designer. So we need to make sure that when we're talking to them, we're talking in these terms. We're not trotting out our folio and telling them how good we are. We're actually talking about them and their industry. So let's move on from that and look at how we identify design value clients. We're basing this around an imaginary design studio called Roto Partners. This is an amalgam of a lot of studios we've worked with. So the facts and figures and the methodology used here is real. We've actually applied all of this in a number of agencies about this size, just to give you the context for how you go about doing this. So Roto's got 2 partners, plus 6.5 full-time equivalent staff. The creative director is a partner and manages 5 designers. There's a senior designer who's also a design manager, client service type person working directly with clients. a business director who handles all of the new business development, a lot of client servicing, and all the non-design tasks in the business. They have a studio manager who's largely responsible for trafficking all the work through the business, and a part-time bookkeeper. Their services, they offer a strategy service, which is very heavily based in research. So they don't do strategy until they've done a decent level of research. That research leads into design. They also do copywriting and writing for clients. They handle all the implementation. So they'll take the project all the way through, and they're working in both print and web. They have what we term pillars. So these are the areas that they've identified they have a level of expertise and knowledge. One is the plastics industry, the other is engineering businesses, and the third is in the wine industry. So very diverse pillars that ensure their business is going to be profitable. What's the action plan for this agency to go out and find a client who values design? Well, you have to, and they did. They just started by defining the pillars that they operate in, and that was the three I just covered off. They then do research into one of those pillars to begin with to get the depth of knowledge and encapsulate it. The pillars are defined because they have existing knowledge in that space, because they've worked in that space, but they're going to add to that with some attributable research they can attribute back to sources other than themselves. That process will allow them to identify clients, and then they will do specific client research, and from that they're going to write a design value proposition. So that's their action plan. The pillars thereafter, they have a plastics industry, engineering, and winemaking. So they've decided they're going to focus on plastics industry, and that's where they're going to do their research to begin with. They're going to do industry-wide research in the Australian plastics industry. Then once that's helped them identify a potential client, they're going to do primary research on that client. So we're going to take you through all this process. So the first part of looking at an industry for a pillar is to make sure that it's got the diversity of products, services, clients that will make it a viable industry for you to work in. So what this is research that's easily found on the website, and that's where we found this. It's an encapsulation of what happens in the plastics industry in Australia, and it's spread across agriculture, mining. Manufacturing is the largest part of the use of plastics, construction, and then services, which is largely also the household type products. Then when you split all that out, you can see that there's 9 different areas that those products fit into. So what we're saying with this is there's a hell of a lot of variation between communicating about agricultural products or sporting and leisure goods products. So what this says to us is this industry is ripe for the use of design to help these businesses communicate better with their customers and their customers' customers for that matter. This is an initial investigation. High level says, yes, this is an industry worth pursuing. The next is to dive into very specific research about the industry. Now, this is a number of sources: IBISWorld, Deloitte, McKinsey, PwC, and the Australian Bureau of Statistics. IBISWorld gives you a whole lot of facts and figures about industry groups and then specific businesses, large businesses within that group. Deloitte, McKinsey, and PwC are constantly pitching into industry groups to get business. So what they do is they go out and conduct research in that space, and they publish the research, and that is actually their new business pitch, is that research. It's an amazing source of information about an industry. It also leads to looking at individuals, because quite often within that research, they'll go off and they'll interview people within the industry and get a better understanding of their place in the industry. So it can actually open up a lot of opportunities by simply Googling plastics industry Australia, Deloitte, and looking for what information comes out of it. The real key source is IBIS World. Now, in Victoria, all you have to do is join the State Library, costs nothing. Just jump on and join. And you can then get access to all of the IBIS World research on Australian industries. It's worth a bucket of money per annum to get that. If you're from another state, I would try your state libraries and see whether they are doing the same sort of thing there. But IBIS World will give you some really in-depth information into the industry, a lot of facts and figures. ABS does it also, but doesn't have the analysis that IBIS World puts to it. And IBIS World doesn't have the type of analysis that Deloitte, McKinsey and PwC put to it. So there's an amalgam of all of that information to research the plastics industry. And if we head off down that path, what we're going to find, and this is what we're doing, is just still checking that is this an industry we really want to work in. It tells us they've got a revenue of $9.3 billion Australian dollars per annum. But it also tells us that 70% of that business is imported products, already finished products. Typically, they're brought in, they're then wholesaled through an Australian distributor. Now, you might think that's a disaster if so much of that $9.3 billion is accounted for in imports. But if you delve into this and you're reading in the IBIS World and the other research, what you find is a massive movement for import replacement. There's a whole lot of issues, environmental issues around imported plastics. And so there's a very good story there for import replacement. There's certainly incentives in the federal government's industry packages for import replacements. So what that says is, with 70% of it being imports, there's a massive market there for import replacements. The next thing that we know is that there's 1.5 million tonnes of plastics in Australia each year. That includes the stuff that's imported and what's made here locally, and that only 20% of it is recycled. This opens up a whole lot of other opportunities. The environmental aspects of this industry needs a whole lot of communication. CSIRO has just recently done research into this industry, and there's now a movement that says they want by 2030, 80%, there'll be an 80% reduction in the disposal of plastic products. There's a whole lot of research around how products find their way into the waste system and into our oceans. So there's a massive amount of communication. The CSIRO identified the biggest problem in getting recycling of plastics going in this country is communication. So that obviously opens up opportunities for us. So that quick analysis of the plastics industry from this data tells us that, yes, there's a whole lot of opportunities here in this industry. So in part, this justifies why you spend this time. Now, this research I did, although I did know a little about the plastics industry, because we have a good friend who's a CFO in a large plastics company, it took about 2 days of research to get my head around all of the opportunities in this area, so that I could now sit down and I could start writing intelligently about the plastics industry. So that 2-day investment is worth it, because I can see that across the whole plastics industry, there's a whole lot of opportunities once we can crack into it. Okay, so IBIS World gives us another set of key trends, which we really need to look at, because that tells us also what directions we're going to need to think of when we're looking at businesses in this sector. So there's a whole lot of competition from imported products and substitute materials. We've talked about the imported products and what that amounts to. The substitute materials, there's a whole movement to say let's get rid of plastics altogether. There are other materials we could be using. They don't stack up at the moment for a replacement of plastic, but eventually will. But the interesting thing is they're talking about the process for manufacturing of those substitute materials is going to be the same as plastic. So the plastics people will be able to move into that space. The industry's contracted over the past 5 years, and it's contracted faster than the overall Australian industries have. What this tells us is that there's fewer in the market, there's fewer players in the market now, which means that the opportunities are greater because they've still got to satisfy the total needs in the country. And it also says that those that have survived have actually been able to work out how to survive. So there's a fair chance they're going to be well worth pursuing. The environmental concerns are actually leading to a very positive thing where there's high margin plastic packaging being developed because of the environmental concerns. So that the recycling of certain plastics is much easier, and that's generating a much higher margin, particularly in a space where the raw materials for plastic, oil, has become so expensive. So recycling is coming into its own, and it's producing higher margins. The heavy industry and the non-building construction, like infrastructure, building roads, bridges, things like that, those two areas will boost the demand for plastic products. The general construction industry is at a bit of a downturn, but these other two areas are now using a whole lot of more industrial type uses of plastics. And the last positive thing is that the plastics sector is really focused on import replacement. So you've got there a whole lot of communication that needs to go on around the concept of import replacement. How do we take that and then start to look for this specific client? Well, we do online research, Google. That then leads us into using LinkedIn, and we would research online for industry magazines to see what's happening in the industry. Industry associations have magazines, so looking at the industry associations, and there's a number in this space, you get a good idea of who's who in the zoo. And Service Safari, which is actually checking out how clients perceive the businesses that you've identified. Online research, we're saying plastics industry, manufacturing, Brisbane, because this agency is based in Brisbane. There are about 4 of them. BC Plastics or B&C Plastics came up near to the top. They're amongst a whole lot of other manufacturers who do business in Brisbane, but they're not actually located in Brisbane. So this was a clear indicator. Let's start with B&C Plastics and investigate them and see what happens. Now, I did investigate 2 or 3 others that had come up further down the list, and decided B&C Plastics, after a very quick search, had the best potential to follow through for finding a client who values design. So what I'm going to do now with B&C Plastics is I'm going to look for the owner and decision maker, and I'm going to use LinkedIn, I'll use website, and I'll use industry mags to sort of research that individual or individuals. I then want to analyse what language they're using. How much do they talk about the clients, the customers, their own staff and their well-being? All those things that we know are key factors in human-centred design. So that's a really good measure that they are going to be design savvy. We're then going to apply some industry-wide research to look at where they're at. So we're going to examine them and say, well, where do they fit in the industry? Are they actually producing a range of products that's going to fit across the industry, which makes them fairly recession-proof? We're then going to do some direct observation, what the customers experience. And in today's world, that's very easy. This is the Safari, Service Safari that we're doing. The Google search, just simply by putting in B&C Plastics review, brings up a whole lot of reviews, both the Google style reviews, which you should be skeptical of, but quite often negative reviews do get through there. There's a number of those sites that also have feedback from employees, and you can get a feel for the business operations by looking at those. So that's the direct observation we're going to do. we jump into BNC Plastics and say, well, is this going to be a business that's got enough span to give us plenty of work, but also to make them a sustainable business? So we look at what they manufacture, and this requires some understanding of the plastics industry to make sense of it. So they use it. There's a thing called two-shot molding, which basically allows you to produce quite complex products that will be used in engineering and mining, and also in the electrical industry. They do a lot of work in plumbing and water harvesting. You can imagine the plastics that are used there. Engineering components nowadays, with some of the plastics available, we can actually produce components for machinery that are plastics. So they're involved in product replacement there. Lighting, they cover off the lighting industry by producing lighting diffusers. So obviously in the building and construction industry, a big product line. They are able to produce flame retardant components. Now, this is a value add across the whole lot of them. Thermoplastic rubbers are the sorts of things that you can produce quite complex units with that particularly fit into the engineering and electrical space. So they're like the panels that have a soft touch start button. And that's thermoplastics rubbers. Electronic housings, which fits very much that thermoplastics rubber. And that's so the Internet of Things, just about anything you can name that works on the Internet of Things, such as the Wi-Fi enabled security systems. The housings around those are produced out of BNC Plastics, and they produce a whole lot of homewares. So what we looked at this and we're saying, well, there's a whole lot of different materials there that they're using, and a lot of areas that they manufacture in, or components that they manufacture, which says to us there's a whole lot of different communication needs to go on, because these components are fitting into completely different industries. So yes, this is number one, they've got a diversity that we can say will make them a sustainable business, but they've also got a diversity that requires our skills to communicate for them. Then we look at the industries that they're working in. If you remember back to that diagram, and we're looking at how broad they can spread themselves out across other industries in the country, which also makes them sustainable, which also leads to the communication needs. So the whole lifestyle sector, the 4x4, car driving, bush bashing, boating, fishing and camping. And there's actually a clue in there when we get to see the CEO why they're in that space. They're in the industrial space, so that broadly covers a lot of the engineering and also the non-office and housing construction area. They do cover building and construction, and there's still required materials to work in there. The electronics, we talked about those sort of soft touch switching, that sort of thing in the electronics industry. They're working in mining. Mining doesn't use a hell of a lot of plastics, but they've got in with some products that specifically fit for the mining industry. The utility sectors like water and power, they're producing products to go into there, and agriculture. So what we're saying here is, yes, they've got a span that makes them a sustainable business, but they've got a span that's going to require communication as well. So we jump in and we take a look at their LinkedIn profile. And this is where we really start to notice what's going on. Just this basic description, creating plastic components, and then they put design, development, and manufacture. So if they're designing products that they then manufacture, they've got an appreciation of design. They understand the value they can add to the product through design. So there's a whole lot of stuff you don't have to convince them of. The whole idea that they talk about creating also says these are guys that are going to be interested in what we do as designers. Just touching base with them at this point says we understand them. If we then dive further into their LinkedIn profile, we come up with Royston Kent. Now, please don't start badgering this guy. He doesn't know we're doing this. And I would suggest if you do, unless you've got a very good credentials in plastics and environment, you probably won't get too far with him. But this is how we would analyse someone like this, the CEO. So he doesn't call himself, he calls himself the CEO, but the C stands for creative executive officer. And this, I didn't know this until I opened up Royston's profile and looked at it and thought, yep, this guy is the guy we want. He is going to appreciate design. He's going to understand design value. So he calls himself the creative executive officer. So we're immediately into understanding just how he thinks. We take a look at his connections. He has people who are plastic product designers. He's got designers like Rowan Lamont, who's heavily into the business model canvas and how design and businesses work together. He's got Peter, who's essentially a graphic designer, branding designer in Brisbane, very well known, very well established up there. You've got a guy from Graphica who's supplying basic sort of graphic services. Rob Getty, who, if you read his profile, he's an innovator. He's very much into innovation. So what this is telling us is this guy's well connected in the design industry. He's already using designers. So if we're going to want to break in there, we're going to have a very good story about how we can work with him. And that's part of what we want to show you. But please don't badger him. Okay, so then we take a look at his profile. And what I've done is to highlight the words here that show me he is really the sort of person that would react well to the concept of human-centered design. He talks about high-performing teams. So he starts off talking about his team and their role is to achieve outcomes for their customers. He mentors the people he works with, which tells us again that he's a human-focused, human-centered. And he looks at customers from the challenges and opportunities they present, not the problems, but the challenges and the opportunities, and that his role is to meet their needs. So that's classic human-centered design. And his focus is he wants success for his team and his customers. He's a member of a group called the Entrepreneurs Organisation Community. When you look that up, this is a high-powered group of people who are innovators and entrepreneurs. So obviously, the whole idea of new thinking, new directions is totally switched on with this guy. He's got all the right credentials we can see so far. When he talks about what it is their customers like, it's the passion and the outstanding customer service. So he's focused on customer service. The next bit is really interesting because he then moved into the environmental stuff where he's talking about reuse, reduce, and recycle. Reuse, reduce, and recycle. That's the whole environmental message. And that it's a message he says he takes to all of the clients that he's working with. Then we get a little bit of an insight into him as a person, which is really good if you're trying to make that relationship connection with him, with a client. You build the relationship before you actually go pitching for work. He likes getting out into the bush and on the beach, and he coaches a junior football team. So this is a really good insight into him. The last sentence is, if you can find people out there in LinkedIn who say this, they're really worth chasing up. I welcome new connections. Please send a personalised invitation. Now, the key in that personalised invitation, and the reason you shouldn't race off and do it, is that invitation has to actually show, going right back to the beginning, it has to show you understand their industry, you understand his business, you've got case studies that will impress him, you've got the data, you've actually looked closely at his business and his customers. So that when you get that sort of open invitation, you've got to think about it from his side, what's going to interest him, and it's those things that are going to interest him. If you haven't got those things, don't bother him. And really, if you're looking in areas that you've identified as your pillars, you will have those, and you can then jump in and put those into your invite. using LinkedIn to work with people. We have a publication called LinkedIn for Designers, which takes you through the process of using LinkedIn to open up these sorts of clients. So then if we go off and look at the online trade magazines, what we're finding is that Royston's fairly prominently profiled around Australia, and particularly in Brisbane, on his whole approach to recycled plastics and recycling plastics. And introduced into this is the words circular economy. So circular economy is a key factor when you're talking to someone like this, because he uses it and he's quoted it on these grounds in the stuff that's been written about him. What we know is when a person's been quoted that way, that's the sort of wording you need to use to go back to him. When you're approaching this person, your credentials pitch needs to be built on the key words and language that person has used. And you've got to work the idea of these, if not the exact wording. The exact wording might look a bit strange, but certainly the idea of it would be worked into the credentials pitch you would make to a person like this. So you've taken those keywords, you've got a standard credentials pitch, you go back and revisit it, and you look at how you can put his thinking back into your pitch, because it's all about him. One of the interesting things, and I've never seen this I do a lot of this sort of searching, I've never seen it before, but what cropped up was a Prezi file. So I don't know how many people use Prezi. I think it's pretty well dead nowadays, but it's an online presentation software that you put together a pitch deck or a presentation for the board in it, and it has some nice animation behind it and all the rest of it. It was very popular for a while. They forgot to take it down. It has some very interesting information in it. One of the things that threw up for me, which I thought was worth mentioning here, is that we have some online software, not ours, we pay for it, that allows us to look at SEO on particular URLs. So we use it to look at our SEO and how it's performing. We also use it to look at our competitors and see how they're performing with their SEO. If you were looking at a client trying to work out what their pains are and where their gains would be, I'd look at one of those tools and just take a look at the key words that they're using. Theoretically, those key words could be similar to the key words that have been used in the LinkedIn profile from the CEO. If they're not, there's a communication piece to happen there. Okay, so what we do with this information, we now dive in to analyse and say, well, so what's the potential for this client in terms of design? We use a thing called the design ladder. I'll quickly encapsulate. We've spoken about this before. It comes from a tried and true system that was developed probably about 20 years ago, maybe in Europe by the Danish Design Centre. They interviewed about 1,200 businesses across Europe to work out how they used design. Then they built the design ladder. We have looked at it and thought about it in terms of the businesses we work with, and we've expanded it out to 5 steps. The basic one is the transactional work that you do. There's a base rate for it. You can't really get much above that base rate. When you move up from that, you've got the idea that you're delivering design plus a bit of consultancy. So this is where there's some advice attached to the design, and it's usually got a good brief, and they're looking for outcomes rather than just an output. The next level, stage 3, they are actually actively asking for you to come in as a consultant. The fees go up here and they become higher on this step. Step 4 is where the client, and I was talking with a well-established designer yesterday who said this is actually where a lot of his work sits, where he'll get CEOs ring him up and say, look, I think I've got a problem. Maybe have not. Putting together a group of people to look at this issue and work it out for us. Can you join that group because of the way you think? So that's step 4. Step 5, the design is integrated into the whole company. Not much of that happens in this country. But anyway, B and C plastics I've identified would sit sort of high heading into that step 3, where they are very much open to looking at the designer as a consultant. The interesting thing about step 3 is this is where a lot of human-centered design tools come in. They're the types of tools that are consultancy type tools rather than directly design tools. And that's why you're being paid the higher prices. So I'd position them there. So having positioned them there, the next thing is to say, well, where does this business actually generate value for their business? Where is it that they make their money? And this is done through what's called value chain analysis. A guy called Michael E. Porter came up with this quite some time ago, wrote a 350-page book all about it. The process is studied. If anybody's done an MBA, it'd be rare you wouldn't come across the idea of value chain analysis. We've come to understand it, and we've adapted it to design value chain analysis. So if these are all the activities that are happening in a business, where can design very discreetly add value in those activities? The point about this is a business owner understands each of these activities happen in their business. Even if they're not using the analysis, they do know. So if you start talking to them about these activities and the value of design, you've already moved yourself beyond most designers. So just to cover them off quickly, then I'll give you some examples. So inbound and outbound logistics, all about getting product, raw materials in, operations converted into a product, outbound logistics get it out. And that works the same with a service, inbound information converted into a service for a client, delivered to a client online or whatever. So it's still logistics. Marketing and sales and service, very obvious ones that I'm sure you all know. Infrastructure is an odd name, but it's what they use. It actually covers off the CEO's office. So it's the legal, the accounting, but it's also where the chief marketing officer, the chief operations officer, and the chief technology officer all come together to work in the C-suite. So that's a discrete group. Research, design and development is one that we added. Porter didn't have it, but we recognise that it's a critical place for designers because there's a whole lot of human-centred design tools that fit into research, design and development. HR is a very obvious one because there's a whole lot of internal communications. Technology management is the obvious intranet, the web, all of the electronic or digital communications that go on in the business. Procurement, you might think there's no space for design, but the modern thinking in procurement is that you should actually look at how you can work with the people you're buying from to help them improve their product, reduce its price, and give you the product at a better price. So procurement is now much more an active user of design. So if we just look at those, and let's look at how we might be able to use them. So the inbound logistics, if you've got trucks that are bringing product in, start talking about the circular economy on those trucks. Promote the idea that you're part of a circular economy, which is building the profile of the business. Packaging could have exactly the same message. Operations, the whole reduce, reuse and recycle message would be enforced with internal comms. So in the plastics industry, there's a hell of a lot of waste material generated during the manufacturing process. So getting everybody thinking about how they can reduce the waste that comes from each product that's manufactured is actually going to go to the business's bottom line. So the communication needed there. The circular economy approach is used on outbound logistics because they're probably the same trucks that brought the product in. Marketing and sales, you'd start by pushing this whole idea that they have a passion for plastics and plastics products, and they offer an outstanding customer service. So there's some key messages that could be put out through marketing and sales. Not the only ones, but it's a starting point. You would use exactly the same messaging out through the service where people are dealing directly with customers. This is the key factor. So if you've identified that as the key message in marketing, it goes out through the services component as well. Infrastructure, here you're going to define the culture and the brand. So there's very obvious, a lot of work there for the designer in working to do that. R&D, the whole idea of how this business can better represent the circular economy approach and the environment is something that designers can add. So research into how people are using products fed back into research, design and development is going to lead to better products. So it's that human-centered design research tools. HR, the CEO mentioned the success of his team and their customers. So the success of the team is very much about internal communications. And so that's the realm of HR. The technology, the whole idea that the circular economy, the reduce, reuse, recycle messaging has to come through as part of the case studies and the whole look and feel of the intranet and the website and the digital communications. Procurement, take that reduce, reuse, recycle message and ideas and work it back into the suppliers that are supplying into the business to try and get them thinking the same way so that in the end, everybody wins. So that's how that's the sort of thing you would analyze using the value chain analysis. You'd analyse how design can actually add some value in those spaces. That all leads us. We've worked out where they sit on the ladder. We've worked out the opportunities, some of the opportunities that exist for us within the business and where we could add value for the business. And remembering at this stage, we haven't even talked to the business. We've not even approached them. All of this has been done at arm's length with all I've used is a whole lot of web research and reading to get to this point. The design value proposition. We think every design business should have a design value proposition. If you've got a major client, there's one for them. There's certainly one for the sectors that you're working in, that this is what guides the way you talk to the client, the way you write about the industry, the types of things that go into your pitch, the way your staff understand that industry. And so we've worked this out over maybe 10 years of working with design businesses. We've honed this process. And it always starts with what we know about your industry. And then, only then, does it go to the tools that we will use to fix the pains that you've got and deliver gains. And then here's a case study of how we did it. So if you think back to that very first explanation of what clients are looking for, we're writing a value proposition to fit what we said they're looking for. That first sentence, what we know. We know the Australian plastics industry is under constant attack from cheap imports. The key thing in here is attack from cheap imports. This is the wording we would be using when talking to clients in this industry, because it rings a bell with them. Immediately, the client sees this sort of wording in a pitch. They say, yep, these people understand where we're at. It also opens up, as soon as you start talking about that, it opens up the opportunity for you to talk about how communication can help replace those cheap imports. So by looking at the environmental issues related to imported products, we can say, well, look, we can guarantee the provenance of the plastic if we produce it in Australia, not so much if it's produced offshore. The second sentence, and we're talking about the client, we haven't mentioned ourselves at all. It's also constantly criticised by environmental activists. So what we're saying is, hey, we know you guys are under attack, not just from cheap imports, but from environmental activists. Everybody's saying how bad plastic is. And there's no doubt it is. And all the people in the industry recognise the issues associated with it. And that's why they're phasing out a whole lot of different plastics, because they understand the damage they're doing to the environment. So anybody that's reputable in the industry is not using those small fiber plastics, those microfiber plastics, because they're so hard to control. They get loose in the environment. By saying we understand that there's this activism around plastics and its role on the environment, we're saying we understand, we know your pains. It also opens up the discussion about communication, because what needs to happen is the designer needs to come in and help the businesses communicate better to plastics users and plastic buyers about the credentials that they add by recycling plastics. It goes on to say, and this recognises what's happening in the industry. However, a number of industry bodies are taking more responsibility for the environmental impact of products. We're acknowledging that, yes, we've got all these issues, but we're also acknowledging that industry bodies are being more responsible about it, and that those industry bodies are both the businesses, but also the conglomerate membership bodies that represent them, and that we are acknowledging environmental impacts and we're doing something about it. This is the language you'd be using when you're talking to the client, to show that you understand the space that they're in. You then move into the introduction of what you do about all this. So Roto is presenting this design value and proposition. Roto Partners uses human-centered design tools to understand a client's pains and gains. Now, the thing about the design value proposition is you would never publish this on your website. You would never reproduce this in your submission. This guides your thinking. The thinking that's being guided here is human-centered design tools. It'd be interesting to someday meet Royston, but I would suggest that if you use the words human-centered design tools, he would know what you're talking about, and that would ring a bell with him immediately. And he would know that the function of human-centered design tools is to get a better understanding of the pains that the client's got and work out how those pains can be turned into gains. So this is the language, the thinking behind Roto making this statement. They then talk about a whole lot of different human-centered design tools, which defines all of these and explains them. So what they talk about is affinity mapping, which is basically looking broad, very big picture, grouping together those bits that seem to have some sort of correlation and then drawing something out of that correlation. The standard old customer journey mapping, which looks at both B&C Plastics as their customers, the people that they're producing for, but also the customers of their customers. And the thing about this is that's the pitch you'd be making to a company like this. You'd be saying, yes, look, we will look at our customers, B&C's customers, and we'll look at what journey they go through to understand them. Then we'll take our bigger customers and we'll look at the customer journey that happens with their customers. Ethnographic research, which essentially boils down to observational research. So it's getting out into the marketplace and having a look at what is actually happening, observing people using or buying the products. Service blueprints, which bring the whole thing together in a roadmap to explain why we've got to this point and where we're going to go. We throw into that ideation workshops, which are co-creation workshops. So we're working with the client. We've not got a black box solution. And we develop for the client a value proposition. We do that through a value proposition canvas, which is a workshop process that helps them understand exactly where they're adding value. That's the second part of the design value proposition. The third part is this mini case study. Using this approach with a flexible plastics company, Roto Partners was able to double the conversion rate of their new clients. So what Roto did was they had put all of this sort of work into place, and what the company they worked for found was that their conversion rate doubled. So their hit rate improved by 100%. They measure their value to clients and how that actually leads to new clients through the Net Promoter Score system. So if you haven't read up on or don't know the Net Promoter Score, basically it's a would you recommend our business to somebody else? 7 is an average, it's an okay sort of measure. 10 is the best. So they took the Net Promoter Score for that client they worked for from a 7 to a 10 through all the work they did with them. So that's the design value proposition. It's got all of the elements that we need to open up a discussion with that client and open it up on the terms that that client wants to hear. And we've analysed how we get there. So how are we going to go to applying all of this? It's easy. You start by defining your pillars of excellence. If you've been in any of these sessions before, you know we've talked about them. It's critical that you actually look at your business and work out where you've got a depth of understanding that gives you an excellence in that area. That becomes a pillar. It doesn't mean you turn work away if it doesn't fit the pillar. It just means that pillar has probably got more opportunities for you than areas that don't fall into such a high level of understanding and excellence and knowledge on your part. You then research that industry sector. So find a pillar, research it using the research methods that we've shown here, IBIS World, Deloitte, so on. From that, as you burrow down through that process, you're going to come up with a list of prospective businesses. Then you dive into things like a further web search, but also LinkedIn's probably the best tool for it. You jump in and you start to research the decision makers. Once you've gone through all of that and you've understood the language they're using, you can actually position them on the design ladder, and you can say, well, is this person actually just placing a whole lot of transactional work? Does he sound very transactional? Well, he's not going to be any use to us. We need to move on. We need to find somebody who is at least showing they understand a level of design. From that, the position on the design ladder, we can look at what parts of the business you're going to focus on. We'll then prepare a design value proposition, which will give us the wording that's going to be used in our pitches and our discussions with them. Then use LinkedIn to start the process. And just to reiterate, LinkedIn is not the place to immediately jump in and ask for work. It's the place to build a relationship. It's a place to show that you understand their industry, that you know what the pains are they're facing, you know how they're going to make gains and where they can make gains. You're using LinkedIn for that purpose, and then getting out of LinkedIn, once you've established that, getting out and asking to connect, then getting out and making direct connection with them via email or phone. Knowing full well, if you've gone down this path, knowing full well that you've got a fairly good chance of success with them because they are design savvy. The real issue, of course, is if they are design savvy, the chance is they're working with another designer. The process there is to look at that designer and work out exactly where they fit. Perhaps they're not heavily into human-centered design approaches, and you can go in on that basis. And thank you very much.